Mediabite Podcast Network.
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
I want to play a game.
Don't fall asleep.
Just been informed that zombies have entered the building.
You opened it. We came.
The unburied dead are coming back to life.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the finale of the Final Destination series on the podcast. I'm very, very sorry that it's been so long. I promise to you that it will not be that long until we get to the next film, which I have a little teaser for at the end, what our next film series, it's a series, will be. So, if you have not, please go listen to the other podcasts before listening to this one, only because it's just the finale of that entire series on the Final Destination franchise. I'm going to try to make sure we get a good schedule going again with the podcast, just because I think it's fun. I want to talk to you about a new movie I saw last May. It's not a new movie, but I saw it last May twice. Once in the regular theater, then another day, like a day later, it was in 40X, thanks to Letterboxd. I know the exact 2 days I watched this movie. It was the 16th and I think the 19th. And that movie would be none other than the final film in this franchise at the time of recording this, Final Destination Bloodlines. I'm sure there's going to be a sequel to this, and I hope it's written by the same people because I like this movie a lot. Spoiler alert. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of this, but the movie really was far better than I expected. It was very, very good, and I really, really, really greatly enjoyed a lot more of the film than I thought I was going to. I don't know. Spoiler alert, the first Final Destination, besides that one, this is probably my favorite film. I liked the twists, I liked the turns, I liked the characters, and a lot of the plot I really liked. I think the kills in the film were really well done, like much better than other films in this franchise are done. The kills are very interesting and very well done, in my opinion. I think it was a good return to form. It explained the general premise of the movies for people who had never seen one before or needed a refresher, but it also wasn't like overly done. I never saw one in theaters too, like people who never saw one in theaters either, like just because I think it did a great job. I've never seen one in theaters before. The characters in my book are some of the most likable past probably the first film. Like all those characters in the first film are really well done, and then maybe the third, and then this one probably is the order for me. The cast is the primary reason why I like this movie so much, probably. So yes, Final Destination Bloodlines was last May. I enjoyed a lot of it. I liked most of the film. That's kind of a generalized version of it. We'll get more into it as we move forward here, but I liked the movie. It was well done. It was a long time between both Final Destination films. Let me actually Google that real quick. It was a while between both films. I think it was almost, oh Lord, how long was it between them both? Because I never saw any of them in theaters except for this one. Final Destination 5 was August 12th, 2011, and Final Destination Bloodlines was May 16th, 2025, so that's 14 years between them both. 14 years between both the new one and the old one. And honestly, I liked this one a lot. It's very well done, I thought, in my opinion. It was very, very well done. One of my favorite out of the franchise, probably. But we'll talk about that more later. So 14 years between them both. So that's basically, I'm 22 now. I was what would that be? 8 years old when the last of the franchise came out. So I really hadn't seen any of them in theaters. Never got a chance to. I watched them probably 7 years after that one. 2018, probably. I know that's probably when I saw the first one. Somewhere in there. I liked them a lot, honestly. I liked all of them, but I never got a chance to see one in theaters, and I'm really glad I got to. It's kind of my opinion. So, please don't say you're new here, because again, this is the finale, and watch them in order, because it kind of culminates everything. But if you are, we now go into the cast. So we speak about the cast and all that fun stuff. So, with the cast, we have Caitlin Santajuana as Stephanie Ray. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I tried to pronounce it correctly. She was in 2 episodes of The Flash, where she played Lydia Sanchez. The CW is The Flash. First off, she does a really, really well, like a really, really good job in this movie. And to be honest with you, this movie kind of puts a lot of the weight of the film on her shoulders, and she sells it much better than you would expect it to be honest. Like, she sells this film. If you had any reservations for how the film was going to go, she sells it. It is an ensemble, rest of the characters, of course, but she sells the film 1,000%. We follow her as she has a premonition of her grandparents or her grandmother specifically, but her grandparents in the tower collapse. I will talk about later as a part of the actual plot of the film when we get to the plot. But she basically begins to piece everything together that death is coming for her family, especially after visiting her grandmother, who we will talk later. And why we'll talk about her grandmother later. It's kind of an important part, but we'll get to that later. She does a really good job at explaining a lot about the way the world works in these movies without feeling too much like she's just overdoing everything or retreading everything that other characters can do in these films, where they kind of just retread big portions of what happened in these films. Like, everyone has to figure out what's going on, and then everyone has to figure out how the death list works, and then we have to figure out. They kind of jump over that a little bit, which is good because the majority of people who are seeing the Final Destination Bloodlines have some context for how it works. Death has a list, death follows that list, that's kind of how it works, right? And I'm sure that there's a kind of a way people kind of can figure out the way death works without having to have it directly told to you 1,000 times, like in a big montage scene. It's kind of like how, which is my only issue with Scream 6, I think it was. Scream 6, yeah, 6. It like the scene where they like had the whole kind of meta moment where they did in Scream 5 where they kind of had a big conversation around in Randy's Memorial Theater. That scene made sense, and then in Scream 7 they kind of shoehorned in the kind of meta moments in it. It felt very unnatural, whereas in Scream 5 it felt very natural and made a lot of sense. And that is kind of how I felt parts of like the explanation for Death's List happened in some of the other sequels, kind of forced into you a little bit. And I don't like that. I wish that it would be more like this, where they kind of did explain everything slowly to you, but then also jump over a lot of it because most people kind of know what they're talking about. And in the story itself, this film specifically, does actually kind of tell you how death works in Final Destination. That's not really anything to do with her character specifically, but it's something I really appreciate about this film, as it kind of jumps over a lot of that. And she explains that very, very well, like very, very well, and doesn't linger very much. And I really appreciate that about her acting in this film. So I think there's something very, very special about her character, and I would expect to see her in more films. Do you hate interruptions to your podcast? Yeah, I honestly do too. The one thing I hate more than ad interruptions on my podcasts are ads that you hear on repeat, which, trust me, happens frequently to me. I don't know about you. So you'll hear this once an episode, I promise you. If you want to support my dreams and you're enjoying this episode, you can listen to all the episodes completely ad-free for $5 over on my Patreon. Not just these episodes, but you can listen to all of the episodes for all of the podcasts on the network. You also get access to the commentaries, live streams, Q&As, and all of that other fun stuff that is exclusive to Patreon. So it is patreon.com/MediaBite. Yes, that's right, patreon.com/MediaBite. I will leave you alone and you can zone back into your work or trying to sleep or whatever else it was that you were doing before I so rudely interrupted you. Alright, I'll see you. Hio Briones, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, as Charlie Reyes, is Stephanie's younger brother who's a high school senior. He was in Chucky the Show, and more recently, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, I believe he's the kind of guy who holds the camera in the other film. He holds the camera when they go into the pizzeria, if you've seen the second film. This character really plays a very emotional kind of through line throughout the film for our main character. He really has to sell the reason why our main character is kind of doing anything that the character is doing, and he sells it very well. I would say Charlie and Stephanie are the main sort of serious characters throughout the film. I'll tell you what I mean by that later, but they're definitely the more serious people out of everyone, which I think really sells the movies, and really sells the movies like plot and the justice in the film, and really makes the film justified by making them serious and intelligent and just all around a sibling duo that you would want to watch and kind of root for. which is honestly one of the more interesting things that this franchise has done. I know they've done things like that before, but when a lot of the films in this franchise are really not super caring about the way the characters really interact with each other and make us kind of caring about the characters, which then makes us care about when they die, it makes us feel something for the characters in this film, which I think is a breath of fresh air in the franchise in a way I don't think most people fully realize was actually missing from this franchise. But this movie, Final Destination Bloodlines, really showed how making characters fully realized actually helps a lot. And it's something I really appreciated about this film. So both Stephanie and Charlie in this film do a very good job at making themselves feel very real, and I really appreciate that about this film. So I think let's move on to the next part of the entire family so I can kind of explain more about what I mean by serious characters in the film. So Richard Harmon as Eric Campbell, one of Stephanie's cousins who works at a tattoo parlor, which is kind of part of the first teaser trailer. It's him. He was in Trick or Treat as one of the kids who was dressed up as a vampire. He was also in Grave Encounters 2, if you've ever seen that. He's also in The 100 as John Murphy. This is not related, but I've seen, I think, like 1 or 2 episodes of The 100, but I'm not even really honestly sure if I ever even saw his character. Maybe I'll give it another chance, but when I watched it the first time, I really didn't like it all that much. But maybe, again, some other time I'll watch it. Either way, he also plays someone named Captain Boomerang on The Flash, so there's another CW connection right there. I honestly don't remember the character in that show, but he's also in this movie as one of the funnier, more comedic relief characters in this film. He's very a likable character. He's probably one of the more likable characters in the whole film. You're very much in the weeds with this character a lot. He kind of there's kind of like 2 kind of main running family care groups that kind of run this family, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's definitely Stephanie and Charlie are the one group, and there's another group, and you kind of follow both those groups separately and together at the same time. You really don't want any of these characters to die. Like, I could have watched probably 3 films with all of these characters in it, and I really think that is what makes their deaths more important and more impactful than other films in the franchise. As I don't think it's very smart for slasher films when they make characters not worth caring about dying, where you need to have an understanding and a care about the characters, because when they die, it's actually scary. When you see like in a lot of the Friday the 13th films, there's a lot of, and I don't really care about them very much kind of attitude, because you don't really get a lot of time to spend a lot of time with those characters. Yeah, it's scary because Jason, but it's not the same thing at all. I think he does a very, very good job. Richard Harmon as Eric Campbell, he does a very, very good job in this movie. He makes his character fully well-rounded and very lived in, and I really, really appreciate about Final Destination characters when they can do that kind of thing. Because there's not always a lot of substance to go around. I'm not saying I haven't read the script for Bloodlines yet. I probably actually should, because it's kind of an interesting script. I'd love to see how they did it. But he did a very good job with whatever he was given, and I really appreciate that. Owen Patrick Joyner as Bobby Campbell is one of Stephanie's cousins who has a peanut allergy, which is very important. He was in mostly just Nickelodeon shows before this. I think he does a really, really good job as one of the more interesting, and again, what's interesting here is there's kind of more than one sibling duo or trio here. One with Stephanie and Charlie, and the other with Bobby, Eric, and Julia, which we'll talk about Julia in a minute. And I think this is really well done and truly sets up a lot about the characters and kind of the interactions with each other and the family dynamics that you feel, and it feels very lived in, it feels very real. And I think it just works really well the way the family is set up, and also sets up one of the gnarliest kills in the franchise, probably in the history of the franchise, that we'll get to later. So you'll see more about how the family dynamic works throughout the film, but also by looking at her next character, Anna Lore as Julia Campbell. One of Stephanie's cousins, who you may have seen more recently in the Black Phone 2, also does a really good job at raising the stakes and kind of being the level-headedness of the group, kind of denying kind of how death works, being the audience that doesn't kind of understand how death works and kind of not believing it very well. Not believing Stephanie when she kind of explains what is happening, because of course any sane person would not immediately assume death is following a list and all of that stuff that happens in this film, which honestly makes a lot of sense. She does a very good job of keeping everything together, keeping all of the reality of the situations together, which I like a lot. Raya Kilstead, sorry if I mispronounced that, as Darlene Campbell, Stephanie and Charlie's estranged mother, and Iris's daughter, which is Iris is the grandmother, which we'll talk about later. She's been in many, many things, but just to name a few, Home Alone 3, Deep Impact, and Dexter, amongst a bunch of other things. She has a really, really good performance in this film because she really has a big, big role to play in the movie. She has to play a role, a very, very difficult to nail this kind of role, where she did leave her family, so you feel like she's a bad person in some kind of way, but she also only did that because she was trying to protect them from her grandparents, the way that her grandparents raised her, and then the way that she knew she would raise her own children, and she didn't want that for herself or her kids, and how she knew that she was going to handle raising her own children. But she also deeply cares about her kids, and it's very obvious how much she does by the way you see kind of the way she acts and feels throughout the film, which I think makes you feel different than how we might feel about somebody else who just left their kids like this, who really we should not care about at all. She does a really, really very good job, has a very important and pivotal moments and roles in this film. If you haven't seen the film before, trust me, she's very pivotal to the film. If you have seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. Let's just move on to our next character, Gabrielle Rose as Iris Campbell, Stephanie's grandmother, who had a premonition in 1969. Yes, the opening to this film is in 1969. She actually starts this entire movie where we see younger versions of herself having a premonition of what was going to happen in the building collapse on the Skyview, I believe it was called. She saved the entire building from collapsing, and because she saved over like 200 people from dying, she was the last to die, so she survived and continued to live, had kids, and had a family. Therefore, her kids were never supposed to be alive. They weren't supposed to exist. So after Stephanie goes to visit her, the grandmother, unfortunately dies to kind of explain how death works to Stephanie. Our film begins. But then, before we get there, we have to give props to her as someone who can really give you exposition for how the film is going to start, without you feeling like she's really doing all the exposition dumping that she's actually doing, which I think is one of the harder things to nail in a film like this. She does a really, really good job. She does a great, great job at kind of explaining the way the film works, the way Death List works, and explaining visually how Death works without making you feel like she's hitting you over the head with something that you should already know, or most of you have already known. The cast in this film is one of the best in the entire franchise, and I think there's something so incredible about the cast and the chemistry that they have together. With that, let's move on to the first time that I saw Final Destination Bloodlines. The first time I saw this film, I can actually tell you the exact date thanks to Letterboxd. Not sponsored. Maybe sponsor me if you want to. It's up to you. I watched it for the first time on May 15th of 2025, which we kind of watched as a sort of early happy birthday to Alex. I really greatly enjoyed the movie the first time I watched it, which Alex did too. Alex likes this movie as much as I do. It all flows really, really well, and it's a movie that I think going into as blind as possible really helped. But the trailers never really showed as much of the movie as you would have imagined, which is kind of surprising. There's a lot to this movie that you don't see. I probably watched the trailers like a million times, and mostly because I couldn't get away from ads on YouTube and things like that. And honestly, I don't think it spoiled all that much. I watched it once on May 15th. I knew the way the movie went in the opening, just like immediately grosses you in. But I'll talk to you about that in a second. I actually saw Final Destination Bloodlines twice, once on the 15th in a regular theater, then on the 19th again for Alex's birthday. We saw it in 40X, which I had never seen a movie that way before. Honestly, the movie was a great first film to see in 40X. I liked it a lot. I wouldn't think I would have liked it in 40X or like 40X at all. But honestly, I wouldn't like it most of the time. I think I only liked it because I kind of already knew the plot of the film ahead of time. I kind of knew what the movie was like. I knew kind of the moments that I'd be shaking around and all that stuff. If I didn't and I was seeing it in 40X for the first time, I don't think I would have liked it. I don't think I would have liked the movie because I usually try to really hard to kind of like forget I exist and just exist in the world of the movie, and being shaken around really wouldn't have helped all that much. But I can't really do that if I'm like being jostled around and then soda and popcorn is flying everywhere, which if just a random quick piece of advice. If you don't want your popcorn flying everywhere in a 40X movie, the only way to do that is just don't get popcorn, get a drink. If you need it, the drinks usually stay fine. But honestly, the first time I saw Final Destination Bloodlines was quite memorable, and I think just a good experience at the movies. Really ups my enjoyment for a film, just the whole film, and this is definitely one of those times. So, the film, the film, Final Destination Bloodlines, the whole movie that you're here. What film? Final Destination Bloodlines? Let me talk to you about that one, because that's the whole reason you're here. In 1959, Iris Campbell and her boyfriend Paul attended the grand opening of the Skyview, which was like a very high-rise kind of tower. Think of the Needle in Seattle, I believe. Iris then has a premonition of kind of, a regular premonition that is on all of these movies that causes the tower to collapse, killing everyone inside, including her. She dies last. She warns the attendees and prevents the collapse, but, however, she disrupts death's design, as these movies do. So, 65 years later, Iris and Paul's granddaughter, which Paul is in a major part of the first film, has like a bunch of nightmares. She's kind of having her own premonition of her grandmother's premonition, kind of. It's sort of dreams of her grandmother's premonition is kind of how it's happening. So then Iris, that's when she goes to visit Iris, and Iris actually shows her how death happened. She was the last one. She explains the kind of the nightmares and everything, and dies. So because Iris was her grandmother, Darlene, who is Stephanie's mother, comes back, and she doesn't really like Darlene, who is her mother, very much because she freaking left her and her brother Charlie alone. So then Darlene suggests tracking down JB. JB is William Bloodworth, who is actually at the Skyview. William Bloodworth is actually played by Tony Todd. That is Tony Todd's character, if you didn't know that, which I think is very, very important. And I want to kind of talk about Tony Todd's character, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later. There's kind of there's a whole bit to that, but he dies. Or at least it's suggested that he dies. But either way, so after the whole film's over, I kind of talk about that. And I don't want to tell you that until we get to the end, actually, but it's kind of important. So we're not going to be able to talk about these kills because there is no kills, but the trailer that you see with Eric hanging up by his nose ring in the tattoo shop, he actually survives because he has his leather jacket, and he kind of like shuts it down and keeps the flames down and manages to survive. He almost dies, but he survives, which is really, really kind of a crazy little turnaround. Someone else dies, but I'll say that, okay, actually it doesn't matter because we're about to get there anyways. Julia is killed by a garbage truck's compactor instead of Eric, because Eric, Julia, and Bobby's mother actually tells them that Eric was not the product of her dad. Her dad of like her husband. Her husband is the one that is in line with Iris's bloodline. So that's why Eric is not actually a part of like the whole thing. So he's spared and death skipped over him because of course he's not a part of that bloodline. So that's kind of part of the more interesting things about the film, honestly, is kind of how that's kind of a really interesting little twist about the way the bloodline works, which is kind of interesting and something you wouldn't really think about. So let's look at some of the kills from the film that are really important to the film. And then there's some other things that happen, but they're not as like important and kind of like big defining moments of the film. So Iris Campbell is kind of the first kill we see. Her jaw and cheek is basically impaled through the back of her mouth by like a weather vane, I think is what they're called. Then this is kind of where Stephanie learns about the death list in the most clear way possible by that insane accident happening the moment Iris steps outside her like kind of safe haven, kind of like the ending of Final Destination, where he like hides himself in the cabin and keeps bad things away from him, but like betterly designed and less dangerous. That's kind of what happens there. So then Howard Campbell, which is another child of Iris, is impaled through the foot by a glass that had fallen. It was like a beer bottle fell and the glass almost went through his foot. And then he tripped and then was killed by a lawnmower. That's all I'll say. Um, I would say this kill is probably the most inciting kill. The kill that kind of runs the rest of the film forward. Iris shows Stephanie how it works. This kill shows the rest of the family how Death List works. So then Julia Campbell is arms torn off and skull is crushed basically in half at the jawline when a pretty insane kill inside the garbage compactor of a truck. This kill is both kind of funny, honestly, and also incredibly unexpected because you are not expecting her to be next because it's supposed to be Eric, but he's not actually a part of the family, so it doesn't really fall in the list. Also, which is another really hilarious part of this movie, is Stephanie predicts the kind of Rube Goldberg machine that causes Julia's death, like exactly the way it's like this soccer ball falls, hits the trash can, she falls in and falls into the trash compactor and dies, which is really one of the crazier moments of the film, but it's also absolutely hilarious in my opinion. Eric Campbell is impaled the back of the stomach by the metal rods of a wheelchair being pulled towards the MRI machine until his spine is broken in half, which is insane. And then Bobby Campbell has like a metal vending machine spring is like pulled through the door and through, or maybe the door was open, but it was like flung out of the vending machine and right through his head, and it is insanely crazy. Both these kills kind of happen at the same time, like literally within like moments of each other, because of the kind of plan to skip Death plan, which I want to talk about a little bit. So the only way to stop Death's List is to die and then come back. Bobby is deathly allergic to peanuts, so they think they'll kill him and then immediately resuscitate him, therefore skipping Death's List on their family. But as I mentioned above, Death has another plan, because in these films and in life, Death always gets what Death wants. Darlene Campbell is skull smashed by a falling lamppost. She originally had a bunch of different deaths, which I think is interesting. She was almost killed in a revolving door, but you can actually kind of see a little bit of that by the editing of the revolving door. And there's kind of a trick that they play on you towards when they first walk into the hospital. But that was a fake out. Then originally the L fell from the word hospital, fell off the building and crushed her, but then that was also scrapped. She then almost died in the explosion of Iris's house at the end of the movie by a flying axe, which was also scrapped, which then we see the kill that we see in the film where she was smashed by the lamppost. Stephanie Reyes is crushed against the ground by a log flung from a train crash. Charlie Reyes was also crushed by a log flung from a train crash, which we'll get to, how the film kind of is, which we'll talk about more. But these two deaths are the very, very final moments of the film. The beginning of the film has Iris going across the train tracks with her to-be husband. A kid throws a penny out the sky view, which kind of causes the original premonition disaster. Then a lady in the future, right before the death I just mentioned, drops the same penny, or at least we assume it might be, and it skips down the stairs and lodges itself in the train rerouter. I don't know the name of what a train rerouter thing is, but you know what I'm talking about. The train where it like diverts the train from one station to another, that kind of stuff. It derails the train, holding the logs, thus killing our main characters. I don't think they'll retcon this as being a premonition, but they honestly probably could, because of how like over the top and how quick it seems it happens if they wanted to do so, but I don't think they will. William, this is kind of the big moment, so I'm going to talk about this before we talk more about the ending. William John J.B. Bloodworth died like of an accident or of cancer or something off screen after the events of the film, which is very, very heavily implied. He kind of knows death is about to hit him, and he has a very, very important speech. This is probably the saddest moment in the entire franchise. This character is the kind of all-knowing character from the films. He's been in every film. He's the only character to be in every film. He normally tells the characters how death plans works and how it works the way it does. Usually that's his point. The other thing is that Tony Todd, who plays this character, actually gave his name to this film and many other smaller horror movies so they could secure funding for the film. He did a lot, and it's very, 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 very important that he did that. It was very nice of him to do that. He liked horror movies, and he knew that his name being attached in some capacity would get funding for smaller horror films, smaller indie productions, and things like that, which I think is really cool. So I think it just means a lot that he got to say goodbye to this franchise in such a memorable way. He actually got to write his goodbye to the audience And it really feels like a really, really sweet way out in a world that really doesn't give you a goodbye like that. I know cancer sucks, um, and it sucks to know that you're going to die that way, but to get to say goodbye in such a meaningful and impactful way to such a huge amount of people, um, with the knowledge that you're going to die, and kind of a film that's all about death and getting to kind of give your final message to the world in a very public way like that. Not everybody gets to do that, and I'm glad he got to say his final goodbye. So I found that very sweet and very moving, and it's one of the most moving things I've seen in a movie in a long time. Um, it's kind of the power of movies. So let's get to the ending. Let's get back to fake death. They go back to Iris's camp out, her little place, and it eventually explodes, which causes Stephanie to basically just lose consciousness. They think she's dead, but she just loses consciousness. She actually doesn't die, of course, which means the list is not beaten because Stephanie actually didn't die, which means death is still out to get them. But our characters think she actually died. So that's when Penny skips down the stairs, derails the train, holding the logs, thus killing our main characters. Happens very quickly, very fast, immediate smash rate, like cut to black, which I think honestly works for this film very, very well. And that's kind of the ending. That's really kind of there's really nothing else. That's what happens. They go to Iris's camp to kind of figure out more about what's going on. And that's how she dies. So the overall rating, how I rate these films, if you don't know, is out of Knives out of 7. I would very, very easily rate this movie a 5.5 to a 6. So if you don't know how it works at all, 1, 2, 3 means it's bad on the bad side. 4 is in the middle. 5, 6, and 7 are good. So, you can do the math. 3 is like good, bad. 4, 5 is like good, good. 6 is great. 7 is like fantastic, that kind of stuff. So 5.5 to a 6 is where I would rate this. I absolutely love this movie. I think it's very easily the best sequel to the original film. I would put it right around a Final Destination 5, probably above Final Destination 5, and then maybe above, like right below Final Destination. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a ranking episode at some point. But I think the only reason I like this movie as much as I do is the connection to the original film that Final Destination, I'm talking about Final Destination 5. The connection that Final Destination 5 has to the original film being vague on purpose. If you haven't watched that or listened to that episode, I think is why I like that film as much. I think I like this film for exactly the movie it is without that connection, which is why I like it so much. It's funny, it's scary and intense, and I really wish none of these characters had to die so I could watch all of them again in a new film. That's how well the characters are done and acted and written in this film. Full disclosure, this was the first Final Destination film I saw in theaters, so therefore I might be biased towards the film, kind of like how I'm slightly biased towards Halloween Kills. I never saw Halloween film in theaters before this film, before Halloween Kills, and I really liked Halloween Kills a lot. And yeah, so I liked Halloween Kills the first time I saw it, because it was the first time I saw a Halloween film, so it'll always have a special place in my heart. So thank you all for listening to this episode of the Slash It Podcast. If you enjoyed this, I was probably a little rusty, and I apologize for that. Let me know. That would mean a lot to me. If you have any questions or feedback about this episode, please email MediaBitePodcastNetwork@gmail.com. Listen to the other podcasts on the podcast network. Diary of an Indie Filmmaker and Exploring Cinema is also all there. If you'd like to listen to this episode of Slash It and all other episodes of all the other shows on the MediaBite Podcast Network ad-free, you can do so for just $5 a month. You get access to every podcast, streams, Q&As, and other little fun surprises that are in store for you. You can follow us in TikTok is at MediaBite Co. MediaBite Company is on Instagram. You can follow me personally on Instagram, Jared Poyner, JaredPoynerr. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. And if you've gotten this far, I believe we'll be doing Scream for our next franchise. Which is a little kind of hinted at a little bit, talking about it. That's probably our next franchise review. Or there's another film I mentioned in this episode, kind of for a little while, that might be our next franchise. Between those two, Scream or the other one, which I won't tell you. Maybe you'll have to decipher which one I'm talking about. That's probably my guess. I think I'll work out. I'm going to try to have the first one right around the time Scream 7, if that's what I do. That's my assumption at the time of recording this. That might change. So, yeah. Thank you all. And as I've said for a very, very long time now, much longer than I'd like to admit, like forever. Treat every day like it's Halloween.
Mediabite Podcast Network.